Our New Testament text is found in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 10, verses 40 to 42, from the NRSV version of the Bible. Whoever welcomes you welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Whoever welcomes a prophet in the name of a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. And whoever welcomes a righteous person in the name of a righteous person will receive the reward of the righteous. And whoever gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones in the name of a disciple, truly I tell you, none of these will lose their reward. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Brothers and sisters, last week when Pastor Lynn preached for us, she began this series of Where is Pastor Lynn? It's really a game for Bible trivia, so you can sort of state the places or the cities in the Bible. I'd like to continue that, but I told Pastor Lynn, instead of Where is Pastor Lynn, I'm going to retitle it, Where is Pastor Doug? Yeah. And I told her that I would footnote her and tell you all that I borrowed it from her. So to be brief, because it is Communion Sunday, I'm going to only ask two questions. If you know the answers, you don't have to shout them out. Just raise your hand. And then remember, at the end of the summer, whoever has the most points.
Your mic is going in and out.
Is it? Let me see. What about now? Okay. So, first question.
See, right then it went out.
Yeah, it is going out. Why am I losing it? All right. So the first question is the Hebrew word for this place means the gate of the gods. Little g, of course. No? No one else. Okay. What about this one? This city was built on both banks of the Euphrates River. Okay. Obviously, I had some hard questions today. We'll work on those for next week. Okay. But brothers and sisters, in today's gospel text, Jesus makes an interesting implication. He suggests that our mission is not just about doing grand or splendid acts. Our mission is not based simply on powerful spiritual achievements. Instead, our mission may be something as simple as offering a cup of cold water. And when we do little things, motivated by being disciples of Christ, we will be rewarded. When you think about it, giving someone a cup of cold water is really a fairly easy thing to do. And yet, it reminds us that it secures a blessing for those who do these little things. Perhaps the text reminds us that doing simple acts of kindness is an essential quality of being a disciple. We do not necessarily have to develop a great plan to disciple our family, our friends, or our neighbors. Sometimes the only thing that's required are acts of compassion.
Perhaps the point is really that we all have something to give. maybe the water is really only a symbol or a metaphor to alert us of the needs of those around us. The need could be a kind word. It could be even saying hello to a stranger. Sometimes we don't realize how much that does just by reaching out or connecting with another person. Maybe we'll have an opportunity to extend kindness to a stranger. Perhaps it is a chance to display with visible action how much we really want to help others and to serve God. I mean, providing a glass of water, it's not a big deal. It is nowhere near the cost God asked of Abraham. Let me tell you, brothers and sisters, when I refer to the sacrifice or near sacrifice of Abraham's son Isaac, it's a little disturbing. You know, it is. We have to admit that. We have to admit it if we're completely honest. The request is a little bit unsettling. And I believe that we should just not reflect on this test lightly. We should not naively gloss over the text by saying, well, everything turned out okay at the end. Some scholars say that it was simply a test for Abraham, that it was a test of his faith. That makes more sense to me. If it's a test, I get that. But I must say, if it was a test, Abraham passed it with flying colors. I mean, he deserved an A+. Because when you think about it, Abraham loved God so much that he was willing to sacrifice Isaac, the promised heir, to whom the uncountable descendants of Abraham would come through or would come from. Perhaps Abraham believed that God could raise Isaac back from the dead, so he was willing to sacrifice the son he loved so much. Friends, in reality, trials and tests also come our way. They come all the time. No one is safe from them. When trials occur, I can confidently say that trials will come to all of us. They will happen to us. It's just simply a part of the human experience. The real question is, how do we respond when trials come our way? Do our actions line up to what we believe? Do our responses equate to our faith? Is our character shaken whenever trials happen to us? Or do we still believe the promises of God? Once again, I believe that God was testing Abraham's faith. I believe that because fundamentally, it would go against God's nature and character to ask Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, because Scripture forbids it. In the book of Leviticus, it says, "Do not give any of your children to be sacrificed to Moloch, for you must not profane the name of our God." So yeah, that goes along with a test, because obviously God would not ask anyone to sacrifice their child. Brothers and sisters, I suggest that this disturbing story can provide seeds of growth for us What if we looked at the story this way? What if we looked at it as, what are we willing to give up to make sure that we are faithful followers of Christ? That seems reasonable. Because when we understand the story in this way, giving someone a cup of cold water seems like a really easy thing to do. Considering the test that Abraham was giving, this is easy, because giving someone a glass of cold water is such a little thing. Now, the word cold that's used in this passage is the Greek word churros. It means cold, or another definition of it is someone is cold in spirit. But in this sense, it's used as an adjective to describe the water, that the water was cold. And when you think about it, Jesus emphasized that the water was cold. He didn't have to specifically use that word. He could have just as easily said, give someone a cup of water. But he stressed that the water was cold. Why was that? Friends, you may be wondering, what's the big deal? We can get cold water anytime we want, right? All we have to do is go to the refrigerator with a glass, get some ice, and then fill the glass with water. So cold water is not such a big deal. And you're absolutely right. You and I can do that very easily. We have the convenience of modern appliances. But in the first century, cold water was a rare treat. In fact, it did not happen very often, because drinking cold water in the first century meant that someone went above and beyond for you. Think about it. Modern plumbing had not been invented, right? Nor had refrigeration been invented. Their water supply usually came from the local well. So in order to get cold water, it meant that someone, usually the women and girls, had to walk to the well early in the morning and fill their containers while the water was cold. They would then go back home, set the containers in a shaded area inside the house to keep the water cool. And of course, as the day passed, the water would lose its coolness and its freshness each hour. By the time that evening arrived, you would be lucky if you had room temperature water to drink. So if anyone brings a cup of cold water to these little ones, it means they got up early, ran to the well, and came back with fresh, cool water. It meant that they made a special trip for you. They went beyond their normal routine and made a special effort to bring you cold water. So, brothers and sisters, getting a cold glass of water in the first century was not a little thing at all. Moreover, drinking colder water was healthier than drinking water that had been sitting around for a day or longer. And I get it, because I don't know about you, but I don't sit around thinking about cold water that much today, because we have refrigerated water and it's easy to get. And to be honest, I take it for granted most of the time that it's simply there. In fact, I would suggest that we have forgotten that this was not always the case for our ancestors. We forgot that refrigerators were invented out of necessity. They were invented because of an important need. Refrigerators were invented to provide sanitary drinking water in cities where typhoid was a threat. In fact, in the early 20th century, in America, to reduce typhoid in his company, a gentleman by the name of Halsey Taylor developed the first modern drinking water fountain. He did that because in 1896, Taylor's father died from drinking contaminated water. So years later, as a plant superintendent for the Packard Motor Company, he found that many of the employees were getting sick from dysentery. Dysentery is an infection of the intestines, which causes diarrhea, painful stomach cramps, and sometimes vomiting. So Taylor suspected that the employees' drinking water was causing their illnesses. This inspired him to provide safe drinking water in public spaces. So in 1912, he developed the Puritan Sanitary Company, and a fountain, and began manufacturing fountains in Warren, Ohio. Eventually, Taylor added refrigeration because he understood that cooler water temperature slowed down the growth of bacteria. If you have a moment, go to halseytaylor.com. You can read more than enough information about refrigeration in that process and what caused him to devote most of his life to looking for a solution for typhoid in American cities. Brothers and sisters, I said all of that about water to remind us of one thing, actually, that the final teachings of Jesus in chapter 10 is solely based on the last instructions that he's giving to his disciple. He uses this water metaphor to remind them to be ready to give not only of themselves, but to give to those in need, those who needed spiritual guidance. These instructions were given before they went to preach. They were given before they went to heal the sick and before they tried to convince everyone that Jesus is the long-awaited Messiah or the Christ. Let me ask you this, brothers and sisters. Do you remember the first time you left home? Yeah? I do as well. I remember the first time I left my family for an extended period when I was in the military and I was going to Germany. And my father said to me, Douglas, he calls me that all the time, I want to talk to you. He said, when you get there, I want you to call me as often as you can. I want to make sure that you're all right. And he said, call me collect if you need to. I just want to hear your voice. Similarly, Jesus has been giving instructions to the disciples all along for the better part of 3 years. He told them to travel light. He said, don't worry about what you're going to say. Trust God to give you the right words at the right time. He said, if you welcome me, you welcome God who sent me. If you welcome a prophet, you receive the prophet's reward. He said, if you welcome a righteous person, you receive the same reward righteous people receive. Brothers and sisters, the takeaway or the challenge I have for all of you today, for this week, is actually found in the sermon's title. What can you give? What can we give? Our mission this week is to display the love of God to our neighbors. Who is our neighbor? Well, I will go with the definition that John Wesley used. He said, our neighbor is anyone and everyone. So this week, let us all find ways to be patient to our neighbors. Let's be kind to our neighbors. Let's be forgiving and desire the best things for our neighbors. And remember that our neighbors is everyone and anyone. Amen.